You ever come home, take one look at your own property, and realize somebody made a mistake so expensive they still haven't figured it out yet? The first thing that hit me wasn't the sight. It was the smell. Fresh-cut cedar drifting through the late afternoon air, sharp and clean, mixing with the familiar scent of lake water warming under the Texas sun. I had been gone exactly 11 days. 11 days in Nashville helping my mother recover from a triple bypass surgery, sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs, living off vending machine coffee, and counting the hours until I could finally get back home. My cabin sat on the northern edge of Lake Travis, about 40 miles outside Austin, tucked away on nearly 3 acres of private shoreline my grandfather bought back in 1968 when nobody wanted lake property because there wasn't a luxury subdivision within 50 miles. It was the kind of place people dreamed about but couldn't buy anymore. Quiet mornings. Water so still at sunrise it looked like polished glass. Wind moving through old cypress trees like a whisper only the lake understood. I'd spent most of my childhood standing barefoot on that shoreline beside my grandfather Walter Caldwell, learning how to tie dock cleats, how to read water levels after heavy rain, how to respect land that had fed our family for 3 generations. So when I turned off County Road 214 that Thursday afternoon and saw 6 unfamiliar SUVs lined up across my gravel driveway, I knew something was wrong before I even killed the engine. The tires crunched hard beneath me as I rolled forward another 20 feet, my stomach tightening in a way I hadn't felt in years. Then I saw it. 42 feet of freshly built cedar dock extending straight out into the water from my shoreline. New pressure-treated support beams hammered deep into lakebed mud that had belonged to my family longer than most people in this county had been alive. Stainless steel railing gleaming under the sunlight. Lounge chairs already sitting on the platform like someone had been using it for weeks. And bolted directly to the side in polished brass lettering was something that made my jaw lock so tight I could taste metal in the back of my throat. Property of Willow Creek Estates HOA. For about 5 full seconds I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, engine still running, cold air blasting against the sweat drying on the back of my neck. Because standing there on my shoreline, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and holding a clipboard like she owned the entire damn county, was Margaret Whitmore. And judging by the smile spreading across her face the second she saw me step out of the truck, she thought she had already won. What Maggie didn't know, 20 minutes later, I was about to make one phone call that would turn her brand new dock into the worst decision of her entire life. I did not answer Maggie right away. I just stood there beside my truck with the engine ticking softly as it cooled under the heat, staring past her toward the water where that oversized dock now sat like some kind of monument to pure arrogance. Funny thing about land like this, real land, family land, the kind people hold on to for generations, is that every inch carries memory whether people understand that or not. My grandfather understood it better than anyone I have ever known. Walter Caldwell was not a wealthy man, at least not by the standards people chase now. He spent 37 years building fishing boats by hand at a marine fabrication yard outside Marble Falls, working 10-hour shifts 6 days a week until arthritis twisted his knuckles so badly he could barely hold a coffee mug steady. But every extra dollar he ever saved went into buying this property piece by piece until he finally owned the full shoreline parcel in 1968. I still remember being 8 years old standing knee-deep in the lake while he hammered old cedar planks together for the first dock we ever had here. The smell of lake mud mixing with sawdust. Dragonflies skimming across the water so close you could hear their wings cutting through the air. Grandpa always said something that stuck with me my entire life. Land does not belong to the loudest person standing on it. It belongs to the one willing to protect it when everybody else stops paying attention. Maybe that is why I ended up spending nearly 15 years working marine construction myself. Shoreline stabilization projects. Dock installations. Flood control retaining walls. Most people see wood, bolts, concrete pilings. I see permits. Load calculations. Environmental restrictions. Easements. Federal shoreline compliance zones most homeowners have never even heard of. You spend enough years building structures over water, you learn every single mistake before the first nail even gets hammered in. And standing there now, with sunlight reflecting off those brand new cedar boards Maggie had planted across my shoreline, I could already count 6 violations without taking a single step closer. Wrong piling depth. Improper angle placement. Incorrect setback distance from the cypress roots near the northern bank. No erosion barrier installed during drilling. Whoever built this rushed the entire job. That told me something important. Maggie did not build this because she thought she had permission. She built it because she thought I was not coming back fast enough to stop her. I slowly shut the truck door behind me and looked across the water toward the old weathered fishing marker still sitting about 80 yards offshore. Grandpa put that marker there in 1972 after teaching me how to cast my first line. Same lake. Same shoreline. Same family land. 3 generations had stood exactly where I was standing right now. And Margaret Whitmore somehow believed 11 days was enough time to erase 58 years of ownership history. I could already feel the old familiar pressure building behind my eyes, not anger exactly. Something colder than that. Because deep down, before she had even opened her mouth, I already knew one thing for certain. She had not just crossed a property line. She had stepped directly into a fight she was nowhere near prepared for. I finally looked at Maggie and for a second I almost laughed because she had that exact same expression I had seen 100 times before from people who confuse confidence with authority. Margaret Whitmore was 53 years old and somehow managed to look like every expensive neighborhood committee had assembled itself into human form. Perfectly styled blonde hair that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. Oversized designer sunglasses resting just low enough so she could look over them whenever she wanted to make somebody feel smaller than her. White linen blouse pressed so sharply it looked fresh out of the packaging. Gold bracelet catching the afternoon sunlight every time she shifted the clipboard tucked neatly under one manicured arm. Even from 15 feet away I caught the scent of whatever luxury perfume she always wore, floral and heavy, the kind rich people buy because they think expensive automatically means elegant. Parked behind her sat the same white Lexus sport utility vehicle she drove every morning through Willow Creek Estates like she was conducting neighborhood inspections for the governor himself. Maggie had lived in the subdivision for 6 years, but in typical Maggie fashion, it only took her about 8 months after moving in to convince enough bored retirees and aspiring country club millionaires to vote her president of the Homeowners Association. From there she turned herself into something closer to a self-appointed ruler than an administrator. I had heard the stories long before she ever introduced herself to me. She fined one family $600 over an unapproved mailbox color. Forced another couple to remove a vegetable garden because apparently tomatoes did not align with neighborhood aesthetics. Threatened legal notices over boat trailers parked overnight in private driveways. Around here people smiled when Maggie spoke, but only because nobody wanted to become her next project. The thing about people like Maggie is they do not understand boundaries because they spend most of their lives never hearing the word no. That became very clear the first time she knocked on my front door about 9 months earlier. I remember because I had been replacing deck boards behind the cabin that afternoon, the smell of fresh pine dust still clinging to my work gloves when she stepped onto my porch with that same clipboard tucked against her chest. She did not introduce herself. She did not ask permission. She simply smiled and told me Willow Creek Estates was expanding recreational lake access and my shoreline happened to be the ideal location for a new shared dock system that would increase community value. I remember staring at her for about 5 full seconds before calmly telling her this property was private and not part of her subdivision. Her smile shifted immediately, not disappearing exactly, just tightening around the edges. The way a person smiles when they hear something they do not believe applies to them. After that day she came back 3 more times over the next few months. Once offering to purchase shoreline access rights. Once suggesting some kind of easement agreement. Once pretending she was asking purely for community partnership opportunities. Every single time I gave her the same answer. No. Standing there now watching her lean casually against my own dock railing like she had personally conquered the lake itself, I understood something I should have realized much earlier. Maggie Whitmore had never been negotiating with me. The entire time she had simply been calculating how to take what she wanted once I stopped standing in the way. For a few seconds neither of us said anything, and the only sound between us was water slapping softly against the brand new support beams. She had driven straight into my lakebed like this entire place had suddenly become a public park. Somewhere behind the cabin I could hear cicadas buzzing in the late afternoon heat, their steady electric hum blending with the faint rattle of construction equipment still sitting near the shoreline where her crew had apparently wrapped up not long before I got back. Maggie finally pushed herself off the railing and gave me the kind of smile real estate agents use right before pretending they are doing you a favor. "Well, Ethan, welcome home," she said, dragging out every word with that polished artificial warmth I had come to expect from her. "I know this might look surprising, but the community board voted unanimously on this improvement project while you were away." She held up the clipboard and casually tapped a stack of papers like somehow paper alone could rewrite 58 years of property ownership. I walked past her without answering and stepped closer to the dock itself, crouching near one of the support pilings where fresh gray concrete still sat damp around the base. The smell hit immediately. Wet cement, chemical sealant, sawdust floating over the water. They had poured this recently. Very recently. Probably less than 48 hours old. I ran my fingers along the cedar planks and felt the rough unfinished edges near the bolt joints. Cheap rush job. Whoever built it had skipped proper sanding entirely. Another shortcut. Behind me Maggie kept talking like she was giving a presentation at some luxury real estate seminar. Since this shoreline was not being actively utilized, the association determined shared lake access would increase neighborhood value for all residents. "We have already finalized everything legally." I stood up slowly and turned toward her. "You built this while I was out of state." Her smile never moved. "Correct. You entered private property without permission. Temporary construction access under community development authorization. You drilled permanent support structures directly into protected shoreline registered under Parcel 87-14. Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "I see somebody has been reviewing paperwork." I stared at her for another second, then reached for the documents clipped in her hand. She hesitated but handed them over anyway, probably expecting intimidation to carry the rest of the conversation. The first page was exactly what I expected. Easement agreement. According to the date typed neatly across the top, my grandfather Walter Caldwell had apparently granted permanent shoreline access rights to an organization called Willow Creek Estates Development Group in 1994. That alone almost made me laugh. My grandfather passed away in 1992. I flipped to the signature page and there it was. Walter Caldwell written in thick black scanned ink, cleaner than any signature he had ever made in his entire life. Grandpa signed everything with blue fountain pen because arthritis made ballpoint pens hurt his wrist. Always blue. Always shaky lettering. I slowly lowered the paperwork and looked back at Maggie. For the first time I noticed the faint movement near the road behind her. 3 golf carts pulling up loaded with smiling homeowners carrying folding chairs and coolers. She had not just stolen my shoreline. She had already started inviting people to celebrate it. I watched them arriving one after another like none of this was unusual at all. 3 golf carts rolled across my gravel driveway carrying neighbors I recognized from the subdivision half a mile south of my property line. Foldable beach chairs rattled in the back compartments. Someone had brought a portable speaker already humming low country music through the heavy summer air. One older couple stepped out carrying a cooler large enough for an entire family barbecue while another woman in oversized sunglasses walked straight toward my shoreline holding a tray covered in aluminum foil like she was arriving at some kind of neighborhood cookout. The sheer confidence of it all almost impressed me. Maggie had not simply taken my land. She had somehow convinced dozens of people this place belonged to them now. I lowered the forged paperwork and handed it back without changing expression. "This signature is fake," I said quietly. Maggie gave a soft laugh, the kind people use when they think they are standing 3 moves ahead in a game nobody else understands. "Ethan, I really do admire how attached you are to this property, but everything here has already been reviewed by the board and approved through proper legal channels. I looked past her toward the growing crowd gathering near the dock entrance where somebody had already started arranging folding chairs in a neat semicircle facing the lake. Approved by who? She crossed her arms and tilted her head slightly. Willow Creek Estates Association legal counsel reviewed every document personally. We have a fully recognized easement agreement now attached to the community development parcel. There is nothing you can do about it. I nodded once and reached into my pocket for my phone. Her expression shifted immediately, not nervous exactly, more irritated. Who exactly are you calling? I pressed the screen and brought the device to my ear while keeping my eyes locked on hers. County Sheriff Department. Her smile returned instantly, wider this time. That is adorable. She actually said adorable. You think law enforcement handles property disagreements? Dispatch answered after the second ring and I gave them the address, explaining calmly that unauthorized construction had been completed on private property using fraudulent ownership documents. Maggie stepped back and gave an exaggerated shrug toward the growing audience gathering near the water. Several homeowners had stopped unloading coolers and were openly watching now, curious but completely relaxed, like they had already decided how this story ended. About 15 minutes later I heard tires crunching against gravel from the road behind the cabin. A sheriff department patrol truck rolled slowly into view and stopped beside the golf carts. Deputy Aaron Mitchell stepped out, maybe early 30s, broad shoulders, mirrored sunglasses, one hand resting casually near his belt while he scanned the shoreline. I had seen him before around town. Maggie walked toward him immediately before I could say a word, heels clicking sharply against the packed dirt path. Aaron, thank goodness you came so quickly. Her voice changed completely, suddenly softer, almost wounded. Mr. Caldwell has returned and seems very upset about the community access project. We have all the paperwork but he is making everyone uncomfortable. I stood perfectly still while the deputy turned toward me with the tired expression of a man already expecting unnecessary drama. Mr. Caldwell, is there some kind of civil dispute happening here today? I looked from him back to Maggie, watching the satisfaction building behind those expensive sunglasses. Then something settled deep in my chest that I had learned a long time ago. Cold certainty. Because the moment law enforcement started calling this a civil dispute, I knew this situation had just become much bigger than a stolen dock. Deputy Mitchell stood there for several seconds looking from me to Maggie and then down toward the stack of papers she had already placed neatly into his hands like she had rehearsed this exact moment days in advance. I could hear low conversation spreading through the growing crowd near the shoreline as more residents stepped out of golf carts and wandered closer to the dock, some carrying drinks, others smiling like they had shown up early for free entertainment. The portable speaker had gotten louder now, some laid-back country song floating awkwardly through the air while sunlight reflected off the lake hard enough to make me squint. Mitchell flipped through the documents slowly, stopping on the easement agreement page where that forged signature sat perfectly clean near the bottom. Maggie stood beside him with her arms folded, posture relaxed, completely certain she had already won. I could almost smell the confidence rolling off her stronger than that expensive perfume. Finally Mitchell looked up at me. Mr. Caldwell, I understand you are upset, but based on what I am seeing here this appears to be a civil property disagreement. If ownership documentation has already been processed through county filing, there is not much I can do on site today. I stared at him for a second and felt the heat pressing heavier against the back of my neck. You understand that signature is fraudulent. He shifted slightly. That may be the case, sir, but that determination requires formal review. Maggie let out the smallest laugh beside him, barely audible but sharp enough to cut straight through me. Then she leaned forward slightly and spoke loud enough for the crowd to hear. Ethan, I really think you are overreacting. This lake access improvement benefits over 200 homeowners and frankly the community has needed this for years. Behind her I watched as one of the residents stepped directly onto my dock carrying a folded beach umbrella over his shoulder. Another couple had already started setting drinks on the railings like this place had belonged to them forever. My grandfather spent decades protecting this shoreline from erosion damage, and now complete strangers were tracking dirt across fresh cedar boards illegally drilled into private land. I turned back toward Mitchell. Are you seriously telling me someone can enter private property, install permanent structures, forge legal signatures, and all you can do is call this paperwork confusion? The deputy exhaled slowly and handed the documents back toward Maggie. I am saying I cannot remove anyone today without direct court determination. If you believe fraud has occurred, file a complaint Monday morning and let the county records office investigate. Monday morning. I almost smiled hearing those words. 2 full days. 2 full days for Maggie to celebrate on stolen property while pretending the law existed only when convenient for her. Maggie reached into a cooler someone had just placed beside the dock stairs and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water, twisting the cap open with deliberate calm while looking directly at me. You should probably take the weekend to cool off, Ethan. It is going to be a wonderful addition to the neighborhood. Around us people had begun laughing, setting up folding chairs, dragging portable coolers toward the shoreline like some ridiculous waterfront party had officially started. I stood completely still listening to lake water slap softly against wood that should never have existed in the first place. Then something caught my eye near the base of the southern retaining wall about 20 feet behind the dock supports. Half buried beneath a pile of displaced mud sat something bright red. Small. Familiar. And suddenly every ounce of frustration inside me disappeared. I stopped listening to everything around me the second I saw that flash of red sticking halfway out of the churned-up mud near the southern edge of the retaining wall. The music coming from the portable speaker faded into background noise. Maggie was still talking somewhere behind me, probably explaining to the growing crowd how unreasonable I was being, but I barely heard a word of it. My eyes locked on that tiny strip of weathered paint barely visible beneath the dirt pushed aside by the construction crew. I stepped past the deputy without saying anything and walked slowly toward the waterline, my boots sinking slightly into soft ground where the shoreline had been disturbed. The smell of wet earth mixed with fresh concrete grew stronger with every step. I crouched down and reached into the mud with both hands, scraping carefully through the damp clay until my fingers wrapped around cold metal buried underneath. I pulled upward slowly and felt a familiar weight come free. About 18 inches of steel survey marker emerged coated in lake sediment, one side still painted bright red despite being buried under fresh dirt. My stomach tightened instantly. I had not seen that marker in almost 20 years, but I knew exactly what it was. My grandfather installed 3 permanent boundary stakes around the shoreline in 1972 after a county reassessment updated the property survey following a severe flood season. He painted every one of them bright red so future surveyors could locate them even after heavy erosion. I turned the steel marker in my hand and wiped away mud with my thumb until the original county stamp became visible near the base. Travis County Survey Division. I stood back up slowly and looked toward the dock supports where fresh excavation trenches were still visible under the newly packed dirt. They had dug directly through the original property boundary marker to install those pilings. Which meant 2 things immediately clicked into place in my head. First, Maggie never legally verified where the property line actually sat before construction started. Second, somebody physically removed a protected county survey marker during excavation and tried to hide it. That was no longer a paperwork disagreement. Deputy Mitchell noticed the change in my face and stepped closer. What is that? I held the steel rod up between us. County Survey Monument. Installed 1972. Protected under state property code. His expression shifted slightly, confusion replacing boredom. Behind him Maggie suddenly stopped talking. I looked toward her and for the first time all afternoon that polished confidence had cracked just enough for me to notice tension gathering around her jawline. Interesting, I said quietly, brushing the remaining dirt from the red paint. You told everyone this construction followed approved legal survey lines. Maggie adjusted her sunglasses too quickly. Our contractor handled all site preparation. I nodded once and looked back toward the excavation cuts surrounding the dock supports. Whoever handled site preparation dug straight through a county-registered boundary marker and buried it under displaced fill dirt less than 6 feet from active construction. Even the residents standing near the dock had started noticing the shift in atmosphere now. Conversations had gone quieter. The laughter had stopped. Deputy Mitchell stared at the steel marker in my hand for several long seconds before finally speaking. "Mr. Caldwell, I am going to need to document this." But I barely heard him because my mind had already jumped 3 steps ahead. If that marker had been removed during excavation, then somewhere nearby there had to be another mistake. And suddenly I knew exactly where I needed to look next. The second I pulled that survey marker out of the mud, 20 years of muscle memory started working faster than my thoughts. You do marine construction long enough and eventually your brain starts connecting mistakes automatically because mistakes around water never stay small for very long. I slipped the steel marker under one arm and walked straight toward the pile of leftover construction materials sitting 30 feet inland near the cypress trees. Behind me I could hear Deputy Mitchell telling the crowd to step back from the shoreline while Maggie stood frozen beside the dock stairs, the confidence she had been wearing all afternoon starting to slip around the edges. The smell of fresh lumber hung thick in the heat now, sharp enough to almost taste, mixed with wet clay and gasoline fumes drifting from a portable generator someone had forgotten to shut off after construction wrapped. I reached the material stack and immediately spotted what I was looking for sitting half-hidden beneath 2 unopened bags of quickset concrete. A white permit sleeve taped to a bundle of pressure-treated support beams. Every commercial construction delivery requires permit documentation attached before materials leave the supplier yard. Standard procedure. I bent down and peeled the plastic sleeve loose, feeling Maggie watching every movement from behind me. Deputy Mitchell stepped closer as I slid the folded paperwork free and unfolded the first page. 3 seconds later I almost laughed. Permit approval number TX 44721 Shoreline Recreational Development Authorization. Everything looked official until I reached the parcel designation line halfway down the page. I read it twice just to make sure. Parcel 91-06. Community Recreation Shoreline Access Zone. I knew that parcel immediately because I had reviewed county maps less than 6 months earlier while renewing erosion permits near my northern retaining wall. Parcel 91-06 was not my property. It belonged to Willow Creek Estates common land nearly 600 feet south along the opposite side of the cove. I turned slowly toward Maggie, holding the permit sheet up between 2 fingers. "You want to explain why construction materials delivered to my shoreline are carrying permit authorization assigned to an entirely different parcel?" For the first time since I got home, Maggie said nothing. Not one word. Her mouth opened slightly but no answer came out. Deputy Mitchell reached for the document and scanned the parcel number himself, his eyebrows pulling together tighter with every line. One of the homeowners standing near the cooler muttered something under his breath. The entire mood around the shoreline had shifted now. Nobody was smiling anymore. Nobody was unfolding beach chairs. The music from the speaker had finally been turned off and the sudden silence pressing across the lake felt almost unnaturally heavy. I looked down at the permit again and then at the dock stretching illegally over my water. Suddenly every piece clicked together perfectly. They never approved construction on my land because they knew county records would reject the application instantly. So somebody used Willow Creek Community Parcel Authorization to order materials, then quietly redirected the entire build onto my shoreline while I was gone. That was not carelessness. That was intentional deception. Deputy Mitchell looked up from the paperwork, no trace of boredom left in his face now. "Mr. Caldwell, I think I need to contact county records immediately." I nodded once, sliding the red survey marker back into my hand while staring directly at Maggie. But I was not looking at her expensive sunglasses anymore. I was watching something much more satisfying. Panic. Small. Controlled. Barely visible. But finally there. And deep down I knew this was only the beginning because somewhere inside county records there had to be one more piece they forgot to cover. The entire shoreline had gone unnaturally quiet now, the kind of silence that only happens when a room full of people suddenly realizes the story they believed 5 minutes earlier might not be true at all. I could hear lake water tapping softly against the cedar pilings, and somewhere above the trees a mockingbird kept repeating the same sharp call over and over like even nature was waiting to see what happened next. Deputy Mitchell stepped several feet away from the crowd and lifted his radio, speaking low enough that I could not catch every word, but I heard enough. County records. Permit verification. Possible unauthorized parcel discrepancy. Maggie stood frozen near the dock entrance, her arms still folded but far tighter now, fingers digging into the fabric of that expensive white blouse hard enough to wrinkle it for the first time all afternoon. A few homeowners had already begun quietly moving away from the shoreline, dragging coolers back toward their golf carts without saying much. Funny how confidence disappears the second legal paperwork starts falling apart. I was still staring at the permit sheet when I heard a voice call out softly from behind me. Ethan. I turned and immediately recognized Ruth Bellamy standing near the edge of the driveway. Ruth had lived in the old Cedar Cottage 2 properties north of mine for almost 30 years. 72 years old, silver hair always tied back neatly, drove an aging Ford pickup that somehow looked cleaner than half the luxury vehicles parked around Maggie's subdivision. My grandfather trusted Ruth more than most family members, and after he passed she had become the kind of quiet neighbor who watched everything without ever needing attention. She stepped closer now holding a small tablet tucked under one arm, her expression tighter than usual. I figured you might need to see something. Maggie noticed her immediately and I saw the smallest flicker of recognition flash behind those oversized sunglasses. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Ruth handed me the tablet and I tapped the screen awake. Security camera footage. Timestamp displayed clearly in the corner. Tuesday morning. 5:12 a.m. grainy but sharp enough to make out every movement near my southern shoreline. My cabin sat dark in the background while headlights from 2 construction trucks cut through the pre-dawn fog drifting over the lake. Then the image shifted as movement entered frame from the left. Maggie herself. No sunglasses now. Same white blouse. Same posture. Same clipboard tucked under one arm. She walked directly toward the exact location where I had found the buried survey marker less than 15 minutes earlier. 2 construction workers followed behind carrying shovels. I watched as Maggie pointed downward near the property line, then made a small circular motion with one hand while one of the workers immediately knelt beside the survey stake. 3 seconds later the steel marker disappeared from the ground. I replayed it once just to be certain. Deputy Mitchell returned at the exact same moment and stopped mid-step when he noticed the screen in my hands. Ruth folded her arms calmly beside me. They started construction before sunrise 3 days ago. I thought something looked strange so I saved the footage. I slowly lifted my eyes toward Maggie and this time there was no confidence left anywhere on her face. None. She had not misunderstood a property line. She had not trusted a bad contractor. She had personally supervised the removal of a county survey marker before construction even began. Deputy Mitchell stared at the video for several long seconds before lowering his radio slowly. Then his expression changed completely. Professional. Serious. Focused. But before he could say a word, my phone suddenly began vibrating inside my pocket. I looked down at the screen and immediately recognized the number. Travis County Sheriff Department. For about 2 seconds I just stared at the screen vibrating in my hand while everything around me seemed to slow down. The late afternoon sun sat lower now, throwing long shadows across the shoreline, stretching dark lines over the cedar planks of that illegal dock like the lake itself had started reclaiming what never belonged there. I could feel every pair of eyes fixed on me. Deputy Mitchell standing rigid beside the patrol truck. Ruth Bellamy watching quietly with her arms folded. Half a dozen homeowners frozen near their golf carts, suddenly far less interested in their lakeside celebration than they had been 20 minutes earlier. And Maggie. Standing completely motionless near the dock entrance, staring at my phone screen like somehow she already understood whatever happened next was not going to go in her favor. I answered on the second ring and lifted the phone against my ear. This is Ethan Caldwell. The voice on the other end came deep and steady, carrying that unmistakable tone people develop after spending decades making difficult decisions. Mr. Caldwell, this is Sheriff Daniel Harlan with Travis County. Deputy Mitchell just forwarded preliminary information regarding your complaint. I glanced briefly toward Maggie while listening. Yes, sir. There was a short pause followed by the sound of paper shifting on the other end. Well, I have some very interesting updates for you. I said nothing. Sometimes silence gets you more information than questions ever will. Sheriff Harlan continued. First, county records confirms parcel 91-06 listed on that construction permit belongs exclusively to Willow Creek Estates recreational property approximately 620 feet south of your shoreline. Which means no active permit exists authorizing any construction whatsoever on parcel 87-14. My property. Correct. I looked toward Maggie again. Her face had gone noticeably pale now beneath the expensive makeup she had probably spent an hour applying that morning. The sheriff kept talking. Second, our records division found something far more concerning. Approximately 3 days ago someone submitted an amended property easement filing attached to your parcel using archived ownership documentation connected to your grandfather Walter Caldwell. My stomach tightened instantly. The forged signature. Exactly. Another pause. Then his voice lowered slightly. Mr. Caldwell, we reviewed the filing timestamps less than 10 minutes ago. That easement submission originated through expedited digital processing tied to a private account registered under Willow Creek Estates Association administration. I slowly exhaled through my nose while lake wind pushed gently across the shoreline carrying the sharp smell of fresh cedar and damp earth. Around me nobody was moving now. Nobody was talking. Every person standing there could feel something shifting even if they did not yet understand exactly what it was. Then Sheriff Harlan spoke again, and this time there was unmistakable weight behind every word. Here is the good news. Based on permit misuse, unauthorized construction, false easement submission, and evidence suggesting intentional removal of a protected county survey monument, this situation is no longer being classified as a civil property dispute. I felt something cold settle comfortably in the center of my chest. Maggie's hand instinctively tightened around the railing beside her. The sheriff continued one final time. We are now opening a formal criminal investigation and I have already instructed additional county personnel to head toward your location immediately. I looked directly at Maggie while lowering the phone slowly from my ear. For the first time all afternoon, the woman who had spent months believing she controlled this entire situation looked exactly like someone who had just realized the rules had changed. The silence after I lowered the phone felt heavier than anything I had experienced all day. Even the wind moving across Lake Travis seemed quieter somehow, brushing lightly through the cypress branches above the shoreline while the last sunlight of the afternoon reflected in broken gold patterns across water that had belonged to my family longer than Maggie Whitmore had probably lived in Texas. Nobody standing near that dock was speaking now. The homeowners who had arrived 20 minutes earlier expecting some cheerful lakeside celebration suddenly looked like people realizing they had walked into the middle of something far bigger than neighborhood politics. Maggie was still gripping the stainless steel railing beside the dock stairs, but the confidence that had defined every second of our interaction up until now had completely disappeared. For the first time since I met her nearly a year ago, she looked uncertain. Deputy Mitchell had stepped several feet away and was speaking urgently into his shoulder radio, his tone noticeably sharper than before. Then I heard it. Tires approaching fast over gravel from the road beyond the cabin. Not one vehicle this time. 3. 2 county utility trucks rolled into view first, white doors stamped with Travis County Survey Division in faded blue lettering. Behind them came a second sheriff department vehicle moving slowly enough that the dust cloud behind it drifted lazily through the warm evening air. Every person standing near the shoreline instinctively turned toward the driveway. Doors opened almost immediately. 2 county surveyors stepped out carrying bright orange equipment cases and collapsible tripod stands. Behind them came a tall man in a dark sheriff department uniform, older than Deputy Mitchell by at least 20 years. Broad shoulders, gray hair cut short enough to reveal the weathered face of somebody who had spent decades outdoors. Sheriff Daniel Harlan moved with calm efficiency, scanning the shoreline once before walking directly toward me. The smell of lake water and fresh lumber mixed strangely with diesel fumes still hanging low from the arriving trucks. Sheriff Harlan stopped beside me and gave one brief nod. "Mr. Caldwell. I appreciate you staying on site." Then his eyes shifted toward Maggie. "Ma'am." Maggie immediately stepped forward, adjusting her blouse, forcing the first traces of confidence back into her voice. "Sheriff, I think there has been some misunderstanding regarding community development authorization," and Harlan raised one hand slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough to stop the sentence. The effect was immediate. One of the county surveyors had already begun setting equipment near the southern shoreline marker location where I had recovered the buried steel monument. The second surveyor unrolled a laminated parcel map across the hood of the nearest truck. I stood silently while Sheriff Harlan glanced toward the dock extending over the water. "Nice construction work," he said calmly. "Unfortunately for everyone standing here, our county records indicate that entire structure sits approximately 31 feet inside private parcel 87-14. My property." Behind him the surveyor looked through his instrument, adjusted the lens, then called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Boundary confirmed. Parcel encroachment verified." I watched color drain from Maggie's face so quickly it almost seemed unreal. Several homeowners immediately started backing away from the dock without a word. Sheriff Harlan turned slowly toward Maggie and folded his hands in front of him. "Miss Whitmore, I would strongly recommend you stop referring to this as a misunderstanding because at this point we are looking at multiple separate violations connected to falsified property records." And judging by the expression on her face, Maggie had finally understood something I realized hours earlier. She had never been fighting a homeowner. She had accidentally stepped into a legal disaster she created herself. The next 10 minutes felt surreal in the kind of way only real consequences ever do. The sun had dropped low enough now that half the shoreline sat covered in long evening shadows, and the lake that usually brought me peace had become the front row seat to watching months of arrogance collapse in real time. Sheriff Harlan stood near the hood of the county survey truck while one of the surveyors finished marking final boundary measurements with bright orange flags pushed firmly into the disturbed soil around the dock supports. Every flag landed exactly where I already knew they would. Deep inside parcel 87-14. My land. Around us the crowd that Maggie had invited for her little celebration had almost completely fallen apart. One couple quietly loaded their folding chairs back into a golf cart without making eye contact with anyone. Another man who had been carrying a cooler earlier simply set it down beside the driveway and left without saying a word. Nobody wanted to be standing near this mess anymore. Sheriff Harlan held several printed documents in one hand while speaking directly to Maggie, whose expression had shifted from panic into something closer to disbelief. "I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding with the filing process," she said, forcing every word carefully now, but the confidence was gone completely. "Our association legal consultant submitted all documentation. I was told everything had been properly reviewed." Harlan looked at her for several seconds before responding. "County records show the expedited easement filing attached to Mr. Caldwell's parcel was submitted using administrative credentials registered directly under your association management account." Maggie opened her mouth but stopped immediately. The sheriff continued calmly. "We also now have documented evidence showing direct supervision over removal of a protected county boundary monument prior to construction activity beginning." Deputy Mitchell stood nearby reviewing the security footage Ruth had provided while one of the county surveyors approached carrying another clipboard full of inspection notes. "Environmental disturbance assessment is complete," the surveyor said. "Unauthorized drilling caused shoreline disruption approximately 18 feet inside protected root stabilization zone. Restoration work will be required immediately." I almost smiled hearing that part. Grandpa spent years preserving those cypress roots because erosion around Lake Travis could shift entire shorelines during heavy storm seasons. Maggie had not just built illegally. She damaged protected shoreline infrastructure during the process. Harlan nodded once and turned another page in the document stack. "Miss Whitmore, based on what we have confirmed so far, your homeowners association will be receiving formal county orders requiring immediate suspension of structure use, complete dock removal, environmental restoration reimbursement, and civil liability review connected to unauthorized property intrusion. I watched Maggie physically lose balance for half a second and catch herself against the railing beside the dock stairs she had been leaning on proudly less than an hour earlier. Behind her, the brass sign bolted to the cedar rail still gleamed in the fading sunlight. Property of Willow Creek Estates HOA. Somehow those words looked smaller now. Then Sheriff Harlan added one final sentence that changed everything completely. Separate from those county actions, our department will also be forwarding evidence connected to false property filing and document fraud for formal criminal review beginning tomorrow morning. This time nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the homeowners still lingering near the driveway stayed perfectly silent. Maggie stared at him with wide eyes, like her brain had finally reached the point where denial stopped functioning. And standing there with lake wind moving softly through the trees behind me, I realized justice had arrived exactly the way my grandfather always said it would. Quietly. Patiently. And right on schedule. 3 weeks later the shoreline finally looked the way it was supposed to again. I stood barefoot near the water just after sunrise with a warm cup of black coffee in one hand, watching soft morning light spread slowly across Lake Travis while the surface moved in gentle ripples against the restored bank where county contractors had spent the last several days repairing everything Maggie's little empire had destroyed. The oversized dock was gone now. Every single cedar plank, every steel bracket, every illegally driven piling had been dismantled under county supervision 48 hours after the investigation formally began. All that remained was a patch of disturbed earth near the shoreline where fresh native grass had already started taking root again after environmental crews reseeded the damaged ground. The lake smelled clean again, that familiar mixture of wet limestone, morning dew, and cypress bark warming under early summer heat. For the first time since I pulled into the driveway that afternoon 11 days after leaving town, everything felt quiet the way this place was always meant to feel. A mockingbird perched somewhere high above the cabin roof, repeating the same lazy melody my grandfather used to whistle while repairing fishing gear on Saturday mornings. Funny how peace always sounds louder after chaos leaves. The investigation moved faster than I expected after Sheriff Harlan got involved. Willow Creek Estates Association immediately suspended Maggie from all board authority pending formal legal review. County filings confirmed the easement document submitted against my property had been digitally altered using archived ownership records illegally pulled through an administrative access account tied directly to HOA management. The contractor Maggie hired eventually admitted construction was deliberately accelerated during the exact week she knew I was out of state because she believed once the dock was physically completed, removing it would become legally complicated enough to pressure me into backing down. She miscalculated. The county issued full reimbursement orders covering environmental restoration, unauthorized construction removal, survey replacement fees, and property damages connected to the shoreline excavation. The Homeowners Association itself spent the better part of 2 weeks trying to distance itself from Maggie publicly after realizing just how much liability they had inherited by blindly following her instructions. Ruth Bellamy told me 3 separate families quietly listed their homes for sale the same week everything came out. I could not say I blamed them. Some communities build themselves around trust. Others build themselves around entitlement until the whole structure eventually collapses under its own weight. I took another sip of coffee and looked toward the old weathered tackle box sitting beside the cabin porch where I had placed something small I decided to keep. The brass sign that once hung proudly on that stolen dock. Property of Willow Creek Estates HOA. I had removed it before demolition crews arrived, partly because I wanted the reminder and partly because Grandpa would have appreciated the irony. Later that morning I walked down toward the shoreline carrying a stack of old cedar boards cut fresh from the workshop. Nothing fancy. Nothing oversized. Just enough lumber to start rebuilding the exact same small fishing platform Walter Caldwell and I built together when I was 8 years old standing knee-deep in this same water more than 3 decades ago. Grandpa always told me something I never fully understood until now. Land does not belong to the loudest person standing on it. It belongs to the one willing to protect it when everyone else forgets what ownership actually means. Maggie thought she was building a dock to claim my shoreline. In the end, all she really built was evidence proving exactly why she never belonged anywhere near it.